Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I run through the current edition of my Sunday sermon. This week I got home from work one day, and one of my daughters says, "Guess what, Dad? Guess what was in the news?" This was an NBC News. Former Israeli space security chief says extraterrestrials exist, and Trump knows all about it. In fact, he once almost spilled the beans, but was afraid that it might cause mass hysteria, so somehow he kept himself back from it. And we're all left in the dark, if not for this former Israeli space security chief who now has let the cat out of the bag that extraterrestrials are out there and they're in conversations with the government and keeping it under wraps because we can't handle the truth until we're ready. Now, extraterrestrial invasion has been a very regular movie topic for a very long time. It's kind of a stock thing. Now, we started Advent with a passage out of the book of Isaiah asking for God to rend open the heavens so that he could come down and save us. Now, a lot of these movies have gods and beings and aliens coming down from the heavens to take our natural resources or harvest us. And again, there's movie after movie after movie with this idea. Now, apparently these extraterrestrials have organized themselves into something like the Galactic Federation. And I thought the best piece on this was from the Wall Street Journal that basically said, the Galactic Federation is boring. And this was actually a great piece because it just imagined that the Galactic Federation meetings are something like city council meetings or zoning commission meetings where they just go through proposal after proposal and no, you can't put them all here. And yes, I know you want a variance for your sign. And does can the dog pound really be next to the mosque, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? All sort of managing the systems we all take for granted. Hardly the stuff of drama. Now, what are we hoping for from the Galactic Federation? And again, movies have treated this pretty consistently. New technology that will cause a breakthrough, new opportunities, new cures, new threats. Imagine the vaccine goes perfectly 2 years after, so the aliens come down and whoop, here's your cure for COVID right here. And let's say the pandemic, the vaccine goes out 2 years later. This is all just a memory, but most of what causes human suffering, or a lot of what causes it at least, a lot of the kinds of things people bring to their pastors, those things endure. Complaints about husbands and wives, complaints about parents and children, complaints about neighbors and coworkers, hopes dashed, things unfulfilled. Would aliens really solve any of these things? A number of weeks ago on the church channel, I made a video called The Bible and the Great Puzzle. I also put it on the other channel. And in many ways, all of the conversations we're getting at always sort of come around to the same thing. How can human beings be happy? Or can human beings be happy? Or is happiness really what we want? Or is it meaning? We notice that the world is glorious. You walk into Yosemite Valley, and this is actually, winter's one of my favorite times of year to go to Yosemite Valley because it's not filled with tourists and it's quiet. And the snow is falling from the sky, and Half Dome and El Capitan have snow on them, and the waterfalls are iced over. The world is glorious. The world is also painful. This comes at us time and time again, and if you're living a life that you haven't experienced much pain, well, fortunate are you, and the bad news is it will come. The world is frustrating. The world doesn't live up to our dreams, and all of our attempts to do something about it always only seem to go halfway. Satisfaction is tasted, but not secured. And we imagine surely this must all be going somewhere, even though we've adopted a a philosophical system that says it isn't going anywhere, there's no purpose to it, and it's not going anywhere in particular, which sort of leaves us into the, well, if I could put time in a bottle, or if I could nail down satisfaction, how can we make love stay? You can find this in all of the songs, all of the movies, all of the religion. It's all the same question again and again and around and around. Is it pointing to any place, or maybe it's pointing to nothing? So we've been in Advent for the last couple of weeks, and we've been talking about longing and impatience and temple and living stones. Now, this week's passage is a glorious and a happy one. In fact, it's one that Jesus spoke from in a sermon in Luke 4. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. Now notice how much redress and consolation is just in this first part. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. Their hearts have fallen apart, so let's bind them up like a wound and have it healed. To proclaim the freedom for the captives and release from darkness to the prisoners. You imagine prisoners in a dungeon, in a deep hole, and up out into the light, from a small dark confinement up into open good places. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, and to provide for those who grieve in Zion. Obviously talking about the first exile and the destruction of the first temple. To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning. And in this passage, you're going to see a lot about clothing that, well, when they were mourning, they'd put on sackcloth and ashes. So take the ashes off and anoint the head with oil, which again you'll find in the Old Testament is sort of what we do to feel right and to feel beautiful and to be beautiful. Take off the sackcloth and put on garments of praise, garments of celebration, our best clothing, the festival, the party dress, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness. If you remember last week's sermon, our righteousness is like the flowers of the field. The flowers, the grass withers and the flowers fade and the petals fall off. And that's what our righteousness is like. But here, the righteousness will be by oaks that endure in wet times and dry times, where the smaller plants blow around and rise and fall, but the oak is strong. A planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Often if my wife and I are driving in the foothills, there'll be some decrepit 19th century building that's just falling apart, and my wife always looks at those and says, I so wish to take one of these buildings and restore it. There's something that's deep within us because we watch the decay and we want to take that decay and reverse it and not only return the building to its splendor, but we know that when old buildings are rejuvenated, they have a particular kind of glory that new buildings really don't have. Strangers will shepherd your flocks. Foreigners will work your fields and vineyards. Well, this they know because they've been working the fields and vineyards and flocks of the foreigners. So it's a reversal of fortune. It's that scene in Forrest Gump when Bubba Gump's mom, who was domestic help, now has a white lady serving soup to her. And you will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. Instead of shame, you will receive a double portion. Instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. And so you will inherit a double portion in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. So a double portion. Your inheritance was this fixed amount, and well, if it stays in the family, the plots get smaller and smaller and smaller. You will get double the inheritance you are going to receive. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing. And the assumption here is that the listeners have been victims of robbery and wrongdoing. So justice makes things right. In my faithfulness, I will reward my people and make an everlasting covenant with them. Their descendants will be known among the nations, and their offspring among the peoples. All who see them will acknowledge that they are a people the Lord has blessed. Everyone around will talk about them. They've certainly been blessed. They're fortunate. Things have gone well with them, unlike the condition in Israel after the exile where their temple was destroyed. Their brightest and best have been carted off to Babylon. The other nations laugh because sure wouldn't want to be them. And then it ends with sort of a hymn of response. I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God. For he has clothed me with garments of salvation. So here again we are with the party dress and the tuxedo. Now we're bringing out the best and the finest in celebration. And arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness. As a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. For as the soil makes sprout and comes up, and a garden causes seeds to grow, it's automatic, it's natural, it just seems to go on its own. So the sovereign Lord, remember that's where we started in this chapter, it's sort of bookended by sovereign Lord. The sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before the nations. The nations who around have seen the humiliation and the destruction of Israel. Now they will see her flourishing. That's the promise. Now, Isaiah's is not an alien invasion. This is the creator, the owner, the one who planted a vineyard from Isaiah 5 that we read last week. The author who has come to restore his story that has puzzled us. We look around for something outside to blame, but we have found that we are them to blame. Can't blame it on aliens coming through a giant hole over New York City. It is an intervention, but it is not like a new technology that we wield with our same old hearts. Even as human beings gain more power and more control over the natural order, we often seem to sort of make it worse or use these powers to hurt one another. Now, this is a beautiful passage, and I'm sure it was on the minds of those who returned from exile into Jerusalem. In fact, the book of Isaiah talks about Cyrus. Isaiah says of Cyrus, of the Lord, he is my shepherd, and he shall fulfill my promise. So Cyrus sends the remnant back down to Israel, and they rebuild the temple, and they reconstitute Jerusalem. But only a remnant goes back, and Israel stays scattered amongst the nation. The temple will be rebuilt. Centuries later, Herod the Great will refresh and refurbish it. And because he wants to be seen as the servant of the Lord, but Herod's life is quite blood-soaked in and of itself. It was often said because there was a certain type of religiosity he wanted to maintain, so he wouldn't eat pork, but he thought nothing about killing wives and sons. Empires would continue to impose upon Israel. Greeks would follow Persians. Romans would follow Greeks. And in 70 AD, the Romans would destroy the Second Temple. Now, we're talking about someone coming. The Spirit of the Lord is upon him. Another would come. And he would not be like Cyrus the Great, winning at the expense of the blood of his enemies. He wouldn't wield armies or send people down with great amounts of money to reconstitute buildings. He would address his people, and they would not quite know what to do with it. Some would be fascinated, some would hate him. A very few would love him and follow him, even if they didn't fully understand him. He would do miracles that would attract attention, and they would put their hope in these miracles, but then he would sort of shatter their hopes in that and say, the miracles are just examples. This is not about the miracles. The watchers couldn't wield the Son of Man when they couldn't sort of employ him in their political dreams. Well, they would despise him. And then they would seize him, and they would mock him, and they would abuse him, and they would crucify him. But even that couldn't stop him, because the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. Now, we're not talking about a first century alien. That might have been something that would have fit into their scheme, their ideas. In fact, those ideas are behind Satan's temptation. Throw yourself off from the temple. Turn stones into bread. Bow to me and I'll give you the nations of the earth. Why don't you come from heaven glowing and shining like the sun and riding a chariot of fire? And then everyone will see you and people will say, oh yeah, we'll obey him. We'll be on his side. But their hearts wouldn't change. So this one would come as one of us, born of a virgin, wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. Think of the song that was out a number of years ago. What if God were one of us? That haunts us. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Now Christians get used to this kind of language, and it stays quite unclear for them. What is this exactly he means by the Spirit of the Lord is upon me? Will he do miracles? Well, yeah. But it's not by miracles that this happens. It comes by the Spirit of God. But what does that mean? Now, if you follow my YouTube meanderings, you'll know I talk a lot about school spirit. Well, what about school spirit? School spirit's sort of a funny thing. School spirit is certainly something we contribute to, but none of us own it. We can influence it. We can sort of participate in it. We can build it up or we can tear it down. But school spirit shapes students that pass through a school for generations to come. And the principal isn't in charge, but certainly has something to say about it. The teachers have something to say about it, but certainly aren't in charge. The students participate in it, or maybe they don't, but it remodels the school, and it reshapes the faculty, and it remolds the students. Now, the Spirit of God comes and begins to recode us and change us. This is the Spirit of the Creator God, remember. This is not an alien spirit. This is a spirit that is coming from heaven, but also coming to us from below. This is the Spirit of the Creator God who will redeem according to, the same creational purpose. He who creates now restores. The Spirit starts a process that will change us from the inside out. Now, as I mentioned before, spirits sort of propagate like viruses. They pass from person to person. Some simply repeat it. Some try to resist it. Some amplify it and bring new things to it so that it twists and changes and morphs. It changes the world. And you can see in this little picture I have on the screen, Wildcats, probably the school mascot, and the marching band and the people in the crowd. And they're there to cheer on their team in the field. It's the desire for school spirit and the rituals and participation and the architecture of school spirit built the stadium and has created the band uniforms in tradition and the learning of musical instruments and the learning to march and the learning to cheer and the learning to throw people up in the air and do somersaults and the desire to make signs in the crowd and to participate, to, in a sense, lose ourselves but also find ourselves at the same time in this process as it goes through. But school spirit is just one small manifestation of what spirit is and how it works. It changes the world. People act it out. They build according to it. Architecture and rituals and calendars adopt it. It becomes a drama people dress for, to celebrate or despair. And this is, in fact, how this servant of the Lord operates. He comes born of a virgin, lying in a manger, wrapped in swaddling clothes. Herod will try to snuff him out. He will live, he will teach, he will die, he will rise, he will ascend, and from heaven, the virus, the good infection begins to propagate slowly, bit by bit by bit. In 300 years, Jesus will conquer the emperor and the empire that put him on a cross, and the emperor of Rome will bow the knee. Now, this is always done slowly, imperfectly amongst us, but it continues to go out to change the world. Bit by bit by bit, people adapt and adopt. They add their own to it, and they are changed by it. It remaps our value system. Even those who formally oppose Jesus can't help but absorb the values and propagate them. And so what do we do during Advent? Well, we begin the Christian New Year. We rehearse the patterns. We retell the stories. We dress the room. We change our calendar. We are not fully transformed, but the transformation works in us bit by bit, slowly. It inhabits us. It changes us. It recreates us, pushing us towards the glory that was shown. We await, in some ways, the invading consummation. We, from below, shoot signs up into the sky, awaiting the return of our King. The Spirit moves us below, anticipating the revelation of He who will rend the heavens. He who is one of us, He who ascended, will descend. He who will shine like the sun. He who holds the 7 stars. He who rules the earth. Now from below, gradually, and finally from above. All in all, Alpha and Omega, beginning and the end.